durst move without his authority and pleasure, and if any were assembled together, they must of necessity believe that it was done without his order, he being a captive, it being in their power to deprive him of his life, if any such thing should be ordered by him. Notwithstanding which, they entered into a consultation to have him burnt alive, and a little while after the sentence was agreed upon. But the captain at the entreaty of some persons commanded him first to be strangled, and afterward thrown into the fire. The king, understanding the sentence of death passed upon him, said, "Why do you burn me? What fact have I committed deserving death? Did you not promise to set me free for a sum of gold? And did I not give you a far larger quantity than I promised? But if it is your pleasure so to do, send me to your king of Spain," and thus using many words to the same purpose, tending to the confusion and detestation of the Spanish injustice, he was burnt to death. And here let us take into serious consideration the right and title they had to make this war, the captivity, sentence, and execution of this prince, and the conscience wherewith these tyrants have possessed themselves of vast treasures, which they have surreptitiously and fraudulently taken away from this king, and a great many more of the rulers of these kingdoms. But as to the great number of their enormities committed by those who style themselves Christians, in order to the extirpation of this people, I will here repeat some of them, which in the very beginning were seen by a Franciscan, confirmed by his own letters, and signed with his hand and seal, sending some of them to the Perusian provinces, and others to the kingdom of Castile, a copy whereof I have in my custody, signed with his hand. As I said before, the contents whereof follow. I, Friar Marcus de Cilicia, of the Franciscan order, and prefect of the whole fraternity residing in the Perusian provinces, one of the first among the religious who arrived with the Spaniards in these parts, I declare with incontrovertible and undeniable testimony those transactions which I saw with my own eyes, and particularly such as relate to the usage of the inhabitants of this region. In the first place, I was an eyewitness, and am certainly assured that these Perusians are a people who transcend all other Indians in meekness, clemency, and love to Spaniards. And I have seen the Indians bestow very liberally on them gold, silver, and jewels, being very serviceable to them many other ways. Nor did the Indians ever betake themselves to their arms in an hostile manner, till by infinite injuries and cruelties they were compelled thereunto. For on the contrary, they gave the Spaniards an amicable and honorable reception in all their towns, and furnished them with provisions, and as many male and female servants as they required. I can also farther testify that the Spaniards, without the least provocation on their part, as soon as they entered upon these territories, did burn at the stake their most potent cacique, Ataliva, prince of the whole country, after they had extorted from him above 2 millions of gold, and possessed themselves of his province without the least opposition. And Cochilimaca, his captain general, who with other rulers came peaceably into them, followed him by the same fiery trial and death, as also some few days after the ruler of the province of Quitonia, who was burnt without any cause given or crime laid to his charge. They likewise put Scapera, prince of the Canaries, to the same death, and in like manner burnt the feet of Alvides, the greatest of all the Quitonian lords, and racked him with other torments, to extract from him a discovery of Ataliva's treasure, whereof, as appeared after, he was totally ignorant. Thus they treated Cocopaganga, governor of all the provinces of Quitonia, who, being overcome with the entreaties of Sebastian Bernalcaros, the governor's captain, went peaceably to pay them a visit, but because he could not give them as much gold as they demanded, they burnt him with many other caciques and chief persons of quality, and, as I understand, did it with this evil intention, that they might not leave one surviving lord or peer in the whole country. I also affirm that I saw with these eyes of mine the Spaniards, for no other reason but only to gratify their bloody mindedness, cut off the hands, noses, and ears, both of Indians and Indianesses, and that in so many places and parts that it would be too prolix and tedious to relate them. Nay, I have seen the Spaniards let loose their dogs upon the Indians to bait and tear them in pieces, and such a number of villages burnt by them as cannot well be discovered. Farther, this is a certain truth, that they snatched babes from the mothers' embraces, and taking hold of their arms, threw them away as far as they would from them, a pretty kind of bar-tossing recreation. They committed many other cruelties, which shook me with terror at the very sight of them, and would take up too much time in the relation. I likewise aver that the Spaniards gathered together as many Indians as filled 3 houses, to which, for no cause, or a very inconsiderable one, they set fire, and burned every one of them. But a presbyter, Ocana by name, chanced to snatch a little baby out of the fire, which being observed by a Spaniard, he tore him out of his arms, and threw him into the midst of the flames, where he was with the rest soon burned to ashes, which Spaniard the same day he committed that fact, returning to his quarters, dying suddenly by the way, and I advised them not to give him Christian burial. Farthermore, I saw them send to several caciques and principal Indians, promising them a protecting passport to travel peaceably and securely to them, who no sooner came but they were burnt, 2 of them before my face, one at Andonia, and the other at Tumbala. Nor could I with all my persuasions and preachings to them prevail so far as to save them from the fire. And this I do maintain according to God and my own conscience, as far as I could possibly learn, that the inhabitants of Perusia never promoted or raised any commotion or rebellion, though as it is manifest to all men, they were afflicted with evil dealings and cruel torments, and they, not without cause, the Spaniards breaking their faith and word, betraying the truth and tyrannically contrary to all law and justice, destroying them and the whole country, inflicting on them great injuries and losses, were more ready to prepare themselves for death, than still to fall at once into such great and irrecoverable miseries. Nay, I do declare, according to information from the Indians themselves, that there are to this day far greater quantities of gold kept hid and concealed than ever were yet detected or brought to light, which by means of the Spanish injustice and cruelty they would not then nor ever will discover so long as they are so barbarously treated, but will rather choose to die with the herd. Whereat the Lord God is highly offended, and the king hath very ill offices done him, for he is hereby defrauded of this region, which was sufficiently able to furnish all Castile with necessaries, the recovery whereof can never be expected without great difficulty and vast expenses. Thus far I have acquainted you with the very words of this religious Franciscan, ratified by the Bishop of Mexico, who testifieth that the said Friar Mark did affirm and maintain what is above mentioned. Here it is to be observed what this said friar was an eyewitness of, for he travelled up in this country 50 or 100 miles, for the space of 9 or 10 years, when as yet few Spaniards had got footing there, but afterward, at the noise of gold to be had there in great plenty, 4 or 5,000 came thither, who spread themselves through those kingdoms and provinces the space of 500 or 600 miles, which they made wholly desolate, committing the same or greater cruelties than are before recited, for in reality they destroyed from that time to these very days above 100,000 poor souls, more than he gives an account of, and with less fear of God and the king, nay, with less mercy have they destroyed the greatest part of mankind in these kingdoms, above 4 millions suffering by violent death. A few days after, they darted to death with arrows made of reeds a puissant queen, the wife of a potentate, who still sways the imperial sceptre of that kingdom, whom the Spaniards had a design to take, which instigated him to raise a rebellion, and he still continues a rebel. They seized the queen his consort, and contrary to all law and equity murdered her, as is said before, who was then, as report, big with child, only for this reason, that they might add fresh affliction and grief to her husband. End of section 19.
Section 20 of A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. Translator unknown. Section 20. Of the New Kingdom of Granada. Many tyrants there were who set sail from Venezuela, St. Martha, and Carthagena, hastening to the conquest of Perusia, Anno Domini 1539, and they, accompanied with many more going farther from this region, endeavored to penetrate into the heart of this country, where they found about 300 miles from Carthagena and St. Martha many admirable provinces and most fruitful land, furnished with an even-tempered or meek-spirited people, as they are in other parts of India, very rich in gold, and those sorts of precious stones known by the name of emeralds, to which province they gave the name of Granada, upon this account, because the tyrant who first arrived in these regions was born in the kingdom of Granada belonging to these parts. Now they that spoiled these provinces with their rapine, being wicked, cruel, infamous butchers, and delighting in the effusion of human blood, having practically experimented the piacular and grand enormities perpetrated among the Indians, and upon this account their diabolical actions are so great, so many in number, and represented so grievously horrid by circumstantial aggravations, that they exceed all the villainies committed by others, nay, by themselves, in other regions. I will only select and cull out a few of so great a number which have been transacted by them within these 3 years, for my present purpose. A certain governor, because he that went to commit depredations and spoils in the kingdom of Granada would not admit him as a companion in his robberies and cruelties, set up an inquisition, and produced proofs confirmed by great evidence, whereby he palpably lays open and proves the slaughters and homicides he committed, and persists in to this very day, which were read in the Indian courts of judicature and are there now recorded. In this inquisition the witnesses depose that when all these kingdoms enjoyed peace and tranquillity,
the Indians served the Spaniards, and got their living by constant day labor.